Hello everyone, my name is Kelvin Ampem-Darko and I am a first-year anesthesiology and critical care medicine resident in Baltimore, Maryland. And today I want to make a video about what it's like finding housing in residency, or functionally what I wish I knew about finding housing. We're in the season where most applicants in medical school have essentially ended their interviews and are looking to submit their rank list, or if you already have, congratulations. And usually what comes with that is hopefully you match, but after that, there is a lot to figure out in very little time. I remember at this very point in my career, about a year ago, it was quite stressful because no one had really given me any guidance on how to go about this process. And I think that I wish that in the past, there had been someone to do exactly what I'm about to do here, which is talk about exactly how the process can be. Again, keep in mind that this would not apply to everyone necessarily, but I do think that there is some utility in you hearing about, hey, what was it like for other people? What was the process like? How did they navigate it? And even though the circumstances may not be exactly the same, there is some reassurance to be gotten from how someone else has done it. So on that note, I think that I need to frame properly the fact that this may not apply to everyone. That being said, I think that if you fall into any of these four categories, or in fact, all four of these categories, this video should be immensely helpful for you. This is based on my subjective experience, so there will of course be some biases, but I really do believe that it does matter to hear what other people have done. So, category number one, you are legally unmarried. This just basically means that if you are going for a search for housing, essentially you are doing it as a single person. I'm saying that because there are married couples for whom the process is entirely different and I quite can't speak to their experience. Category number two is that you are potentially changing cities or states for residency. The truth is you can't really know outright whether or not you're going to stay in your home city or move away, but I'm hoping that you have some idea of what your rank list looks like, right? And so you know at least up to, from number one to say number 6 or 7, you have some possibilities about where you hope to end up. I'm saying that because if you have a strong desire to stay in a certain place, it's likely that all your top choices will be in this specific geographic area, which means you're probably already familiar, which means that you may already know how to navigate the housing in that area. So this may not be as helpful to you as it would be to someone else who is changing cities or states. Category number 3 is for people who went essentially straight from undergrad into medicine. There are a lot of people who take the non-traditional route, a lot of people who work before they start medical school, and as such are able to build a wonderful cache of savings for which they can rely on to navigate this entire process. And finally, category number 4 is people who may not have readily available family support or money or resources. The reason why I say that is that essentially you've relied on loans all through medical school, and so you cannot rely on a glut of say $10,000 to help you transition from medicine to residency. It's a very different set of circumstances, and I'm not saying in any way that it's anything wrong if your family is willing and able to help you in that way. I do think that those who might get the most out of this video are essentially those who kind of have to tough it out on their own for the most part. So now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to talk about what my experiences were like. So the very first thing I wish I knew about finding housing is credit score. I think that for me, I was very fortunate to have a roommate who was already married, essentially very mature, and already had some sense of what to look for. For me, relatively single guy, I am on my own essentially as far as navigating this process, and I did not quite know that having a good credit score is important. Now, does this mean that you need to have a perfect credit score? No, I think that if you are going to residency and you have some type of evidence to show that you are going to be employed, for the most part, you're going to be fine. That being said, specifically for me, I was moving from New York City to Baltimore, and so I knew that I wanted to apply to an apartment complex, and for that process, you will have your credit score checked. One thing I'm grateful I did was asking my mother to put me on her credit card because her credit was A1. Because she did that, I didn't actually have to have my own credit card open. It automatically bumped up my credit score. So this is one thing I do recommend, especially if you're very close with your family and there's someone you trust in your family who has great credit. It's a very quick and easy way to get you set up for success and kind of take the burden off of you worrying about a potential rejection from an apartment complex. Secondly, there's this YouTube video I found by this YouTuber, Shahida Hill, who basically outline very simple steps you can take to kind of bump up your credit score if going to a parent or someone you trust isn't a very viable option for you. I'm going to put the link down in the description below for you to check out as well. And when it comes to credit score, the last thing I do want to add is that it definitely helps to have an offer letter from your residency spot before applying for housing. There are a lot of places in an area, especially if they're used to residents and doctors coming in and out of the area, who will usually find your offer letter sufficient and would not even ask for your credit card statement, your credit score, or how much money you have in your bank account. That being said, anecdotally, I know that if you move into a certain city with housing that is privately owned, an individual could not care less about whether or not you're a doctor. What they care about is, if for whatever reason you're unable to make rent, can you cover yourself with your savings? And so you may have an offer letter from a residency spot, but do not bank on that as an end all be all, because if it's an individual homeowner, they may still request to see your bank statements to see that you have enough money in the bank account. In my case, that was not going to be feasible because I just had almost nothing left to my name when medical school was over. And so that's something that I am grateful I learned about during the process. And so it's something to keep in mind as well going forward. The second thing I wish I knew about finding housing is commuting considerations. So what do I mean by that? I mean that me coming from New York City, I had already sold my car before starting medical school. That means that I was essentially leaving one city that did not require personal transportation to another that did. So that means that you're going to have to navigate the whole process. Ultimately, what I decided to do was that I wasn't going to immediately take out a car loan or try to buy a car because I didn't have enough savings built up to do that. And so I opted to live in an apartment building close to my hospital. That is something that I chose to do because I realized that it would take a lot of the hassle off of commuting. And the second thing I knew that it would do for me personally is to get more sleep. That being said though, what that really did for me was to free me of the burden of trying to find a car or getting a car loan and adding more to my student loan debt and trying to commute, finding insurance, all these things that I wasn't quite prepared to do in the moment. And so that is something to consider. If you already have a car and you're moving to a place where you do still need that car, it is actually very, very sensible to consider living a little farther away to save money. This is a broad rule of thumb, and so it's not entirely accurate, but generally closer to the hospital tends to be a more hustling and bustling area, and so it just tends to cost more to live closer. This is not absolutely true for everyone, but it is something that I've found to be generally true. And so it's something to keep in mind as well. So it's have a car and live a little further away to save money on rent. Or if you do not have a car, consider skipping out on getting a loan to do that, at least for another year or so, and find a place relatively close to where you work to save you the commute time. That's something that I'm very, very, very grateful I did. And so I just want to pass that along. The other thing too, when it comes to commuting considerations, is to consider making an Excel spreadsheet, which is what I did. And I just put down the name of the apartment, put down the address, and I put down the distance it was from my hospital. I'm so grateful I did that because I think that it really helped alleviate a lot of the stress associated with the home searching process. And I think that it's something that you should also consider doing as well. Point number 3 that I am grateful I knew, but also for anyone doing this process, you would want to wish you knew, is that start earlier than you think you need to. The reason why is a few things. Number 1, there are a lot of residents possibly in your area who are looking to finish residency and move away. So these apartment complexes, these houses, these homeowners all in the area are used to a certain flow of things, meaning during the summer, a lot of people leave, and during the summer, a lot of people come. That means that you have this sweet spot, probably early spring, for you to lock down a lease at a reasonable rate. I say that because the closer and deeper you get into the summer, the more expensive the prices tend to get. And I know that in my personal experience, I would do a quick Google search of apartments in the Baltimore area, and the ones that were open, pretty reasonable price. However, when the time got closer, I realized that the same units I had written down to go check out later had bumped up in prices. And this is something to keep in mind as well. So start earlier than you think you need to. Usually you submit your rank list here March 1st, and you may not know where you want to end up yet. So take your time, but once you find out, it does not hurt to try to get the ball rolling on that. And the last thing I'll say with regards to getting ready is that consider taking a trip to the city you want to go to, and honestly, just take one full day to book tours in all the places you want to go to, all the places you want to look at in person, and go do that. I say that because things can look different in pictures. There are a lot of tricks that these renters and realtors are able to pull with their camera angles, and so it really, really does matter for you to be able to go take a look. Fact number 4, I wish I knew about finding housing, was to find a way to catalog the things that are important to me. I say that because I remember thinking, at least in the Baltimore area, I saw a lot of row homes that were very reasonably priced, and I saw a lot of apartment buildings that were not so reasonably priced. However, coming from New York City, I realized that it did matter to me to not have a concern for package theft, and so I immediately ruled out all row homes. I found this out from talking to other residents, which may feed into some of my points later, but I do want to say that it does quite matter what you want, right? There are some people who have a dog, may be single, and so it would make sense to rent more of a home with a backyard for these dogs. Or you're just a single person who's used to living in a small shoebox apartment, and so, like myself, moving from New York City to a place with a pretty expensive price point at rent, but convenience factors such as having a doorman, making sure that your packages are always stowed away carefully, and to live close to where you work are things that were super important to me, so it worked well for me. So try to have a conversation with people in the residency program you're going to match into and get a sense of what it's like finding housing, get a sense of what's important, the pros and the cons, and decide for yourself what works. That's a process I'm very grateful I went through, and it's something that I would highly, highly, highly recommend everyone does before they start going on their own to look for housing. Fact number 5 I wish I knew about finding housing in residency is try to find out how much the annual salary is to the dollar amount. Why do I say that? It's because that will factor into what kind of apartments you can truly afford. So what I did in my experience is the second I got the offer letter from my residency program and everything was already in the email, I looked at it and I saw my salary for the year and I went onto Smart Asset website. I'll put the link in the description down below, and I plugged in my annual salary. I love this website so much because it's able to break it down in different ways. It gives you a bi-weekly breakdown after taxes. This is incredibly important to know because it gives you a good sense of how much you can truly afford. It's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking you can afford more house than you can really pay for, and so it's important to have a close to reality number that you can trust. One bit of a caveat though is that even with this particular resource that I used, I would say that you still have to pay for insurance, and if you have a pet, you probably also have to pay for that as well, and make small contributions to your 401k or Roth IRA. And because of that, the dollar amount you may see on a bi-weekly basis might actually be even a little less than you may see after taxes. That's one caveat I would really encourage you to think about, and it's something I didn't entirely think about, but I'm grateful that it all worked out for the housing I found. So keep that in mind as you go through the process. Fact number 6 that I wish I knew, and is actually a very legitimate regret of mine, was to budget more tightly the student loan disbursement that I got. See, I was still in this 4th year mode where, oh, I have all the time in the world, I'm gonna just go take trips, enjoy the best of my life, and just live life to the fullest before residency starts. That is not entirely a bad thing. I do think that that is incredibly necessary because you've worked so hard to get to where you are. That being said, when it came down to it, I had not adequately prepared, and so I was woefully unprepared to cover a lot of the costs associated with moving that I just simply had not anticipated. So if you're watching this a few months away from graduating medical school, I would highly encourage you to consider having a bit of a tighter budget because it will save you a lot of headache later on. Why does this matter so much? Is because if you have that bit more of a cushion of your own student loan disbursement, it really decreases the likelihood of you relying on credit card debt. Believe it or not, this is a trap that a lot of people fall into, not because they're irresponsible, but because sometimes it is really challenging to come up with huge sums of money on a moment's notice to transition from one city to another. And so this is something that I really went through and had a difficult time with. And so I would really encourage anyone who is currently watching this to just really consider budgeting a little bit more tightly. And so whatever amount you think you need to transition, double it and spend according to that. I think that that is something that will essentially free you from a lot of headache and anxiety later on down the road. And I really truly wish I had known this ahead of time. Last but not least, one thing I am actually grateful I did was just to simply talk to the residents who are already matched into the program. I say that because they will usually tell you which neighborhoods residents tend to congregate at. They'll tell you what kind of housing they have. They will tell you what their experiences have been, things to look out for, things to be worried about, and things not to really be worried about. I mean, think about it. I had never been to Baltimore, and yet I knew that package theft with row homes was a thing. That's just from talking to people who are very honest and open about what the housing process was like. It may sound obvious, but it's something that we kind of forget to do sometimes. Just don't try to reinvent the wheel. Whatever you're going through now, believe it or not, somebody is going through the exact same thing. The one thing I will say though is it's probably helpful to try to ask about residents in a similar situation as you. Why do I say that? I think that I had a very incredibly helpful resident who talked me through the process in one of the places I was considering to match at. That being said, I realized that she was married to someone in real estate and they could afford a condo that was already paid off. That was not me. And so as much as it was incredibly helpful to get their perspective on it, it wasn't incredibly helpful to me in my particular circumstance. And so what I did was to ask this resident about other residents who at the time of matching were single, and she put me in touch with them. And that was super high yield when it came to actually finding people who could help me and fit my current situation. So that is something that I'm really, really grateful I did. And so I encourage you very strongly to consider doing that if you already haven't. And finally, I would just say relax. Relax, because these are things that I didn't know going into the process, some of which I did know, others not necessarily, and yet it turned out okay. You just have to trust that this is not the first time for anyone going through this process, and that you have to know that one way or another, no matter how stressful it may get, if you're in this period of transition, it is not the end of the world. Ultimately, you are going to be a doctor, you're going to be fine, and everything will turn out pretty okay. It may not be ideal, but I'm only doing this because I want the process to be even smoother than it was for me. There was a lot of stress that was associated with the process for me, and I am so grateful to my parents for them being able to be there for me and to help provide the emotional support that I needed to essentially complete this process. I think that that is something that helped me immensely, and so I hope that this is something that can be helpful to you as well. And even if this video doesn't necessarily change anything about how you're going about the process, I would say that if you can think of one person this will help, share it with them. I don't ask you to like or subscribe, but I know that if this video helps at least one person, then my job here is done.